Sam McKewon is the newsman. Sam McKewon, Omaha World Herald. On the Connor Happer Show on 1620 The Zone.
Certainly appreciated all the coverage from the World Herald across our great nation over the weekend. Sam McKewon leads that department well. Sam, congrats. Well done by your team out there this weekend. What'd you think this weekend?
Oh, they did a great job, yeah, for sure. John Walker at Creighton, Drake down with the Creighton women, Drake Keeler with the Creighton women, and Wilson Moore with UNO. We did a great job of covering it. Obviously you wish one of those teams had advanced in the second weekend. That was not likely with UNO, but it was great. And I think we may be seeing an end of an era at Creighton. We'll have to see on both the men's and women's teams. I'm really intrigued to see how they pivot.
Yeah, I read Tom's column sort of exploring that sort of idea. I think there's a couple different ways to look at it. But also they have the coach, and he's been proven to be pretty adaptable over the years, but no doubt about it, the situation around him changes.
It does. I mean, I think there's a bunch of different things that Creighton could opt to do with where they want to go. One of the great advantages they have is they obviously have incredible young players. I mean, Jackson McAndrew is a budding star. May not be a 4-year player. I mean, that guy could take a leap in his second year. We could be talking about a guy next year that's scoring 17 a game and shooting 44% from three and all that jazz. They've got a great young core and they've got some pieces coming, and they're going to be competitive in the transfer portal. I don't know that they're going to outspend Indiana or something like that, but you tell me who's been a better selector of transfers than Greg McDermott.
Yeah.
There just hasn't been a better scout and transfer addition maker than that guy. Like none. There's been no one better than him. So if he goes out and gets a guy and people are like, well, I don't know. Well, McDermott's track record says he knows. And so you trust that he's going to get it right.
Right. It's I think there's two ways to look at it, right? Like there is I would view more of what he does is, yes, you have to select the right guys, but also when they get into their program, they become sort of the best versions of themselves. So therefore you take that one player and you put them in another program and the same thing doesn't happen, right? So is that a selection or is that a development thing? And either way, it's impressive, right?
Yeah, you have to have the components to know who to pick because to know that you're going to maximize their ceiling. And so, obviously Baylor Shireman is a great example, coming from South Dakota State. Stephen Ashworth coming from Utah State, but Jemiah Neal, power conference guy, 1-year guy. By the end of his senior season, he was a threat. He had one of the best games in Creighton NCAA tournament history. So and it's not just those three guys. It's Denzel Mahoney back in the day,
mm-hmm.
and Jefferson and Marcus and all these guys that they've added over the years. Marcus Fusser, I mean, all these guys, they know how to do it. They know how to add guys that will add value to the team, and then they develop those guys around it. You go all the way back to Echenike. They're just really good at doing that.
Yep.
And McDermott has a skill for it, and he will find he finds the right guy. It's just the talent he has, and then he does. He maximizes who they are as players. But he does have a knack. He doesn't miss very often on transfer. And his hit rate's like 88%. It's pretty amazing. And it's one of the most underrated things about him as a coach is that he knows how to build a roster better than almost anybody in the country for the budget that they have.
Hey, you wrote, speaking of the transfer portal, you wrote a little blurb on the Nebraska women's team and sort of what they need to do this offseason. They've gone out and got, transfer portal guards each of the last, 3-4 seasons. now, and they need to obviously surround Britt Prince with a bunch of playmakers because she was a standout in the NCAA tournament game. They didn't win a game, but ultimately I think it was a pretty solid season for them. I guess what's ahead as you see it for a person who's always around Nebraska women's basketball?
Well, they had a good season given the fact that Natalie Potts got hurt, and Natalie, was probably one of the 10 or 12 best players in the Big Ten. And I think her performance this year would have bore that out. She would have shared that spotlight, I think, with Alexis Markowski. So they'll get Potts back next year. And one of the things that I think Williams is going to have to think about is, do they want to try to pursue a player like Alexis Markowski? And they don't currently have a player like her on the roster. They just don't. And I'm not just talking about intangibles. They don't have a true back to the basket post. I mean, Petra Bojan a little bit, but not really. Like, she's not what Alexis is. And so, like, do they want to go with sort of a 5-out system, or do they want to try to make Jess Petrie or Bojan, those posts? And who do they pursue? I do think they need another guard, because right now what you're looking at Rimdahl graduated, Moriarty graduated, and Widener, who knows? I mean, she's considered a senior, and it may be time after what is now the third knee injury to move into a different role.
Yeah,
I'm sure they'll assess that. But if you lose Widener too, then what you're bringing back is Prince, Nisley, Hake, 2 true freshmen. You probably want to add one more veteran to that. It's a really interesting conversation. I think they've basically built it where they're going to get an NCAA tournament every year. I think Amy's got it to there. But if you want to go to the second weekend, there are certain things you have to achieve, and it is almost impossible to do that if you are below a 60. It just is. Creighton did it a couple of years ago, but that Creighton team is specifically built for March, and had a great point guard who isn't here anymore, and was surrounded by elite players. It just doesn't happen. So you have to be one of the top 16 teams to make that move. And to do that, you have to have pretty elite athletes. And you got to have more. And Williams will have to decide how to do that. The revenue sharing question is how does Nebraska determine how it's going to share revenue with the women's basketball team versus the volleyball team? And it's not a zero-sum game. It's not. There's money for both. But a lot of programs won't be sharing any money with their volleyball teams, and at all. I can only think of 4 or 5 that might, and Nebraska may well be one of them.
They're definitely one of them. Yeah.
Yeah. So so you have to make a decision about how you share that. Do you take the volleyball money out of men's basketball? Do you take it out of football? Because somewhere in there that pie is finite, and you have to decide where it's going to come from. I think a lot of people are like, well, it'll come from women's basketball. And I'm not sure that's the way to go. I honestly think you should probably try to fund that in a competitive way, because in the Big Ten, it's going to get super competitive there. I'm intrigued to see how revenue sharing is going to work in women's basketball, though. Like, USC and UCLA are not swimming in money.
Right.
I mean, UCLA's athletic department is in debt. And so, the idea that UCLA is going to have a number 1 women's college basketball team, and they're going to do that with 0 revenue share dollars or $1 million rev share, and that's iffy to me. I don't know how they're going to be able to do that. And so it's going to be really interesting to see which schools emphasize and which ones don't. Iowa's going to put a lot of money into it. They will. Iowa's going to have a good women's basketball program because they're going to pay for it. Are teams like USC and UCLA going to pay for it? Are they? Maybe USC can get away with it because Juju's getting, State Farm money and getting, Nike money and all this other stuff. So she can be a millionaire outside of revenue sharing. But I don't know how those programs, UCLA is getting 3,000 fans a game. I don't know how they're going to pull this off if they don't find a way to share revenue down there. So you could see a sea change in women's basketball very quickly based on who's paying money and who isn't.
So speaking of, Sam, do you have any sense on how Nebraska might prioritize this, and might we know before it all goes into effect, I guess, this summer? I guess what's the timeline for this, and how do you feel like Nebraska is going to handle the spread of money that they have?
I think they've been doing a lot of background work on like how they're going to do that. And of course, the House settlement has to be approved on April 7th. If it's approved by a federal judge, it may be appealed, and then it will go up to the appeals court. If it's denied or it's delayed, then we're probably going to have the system as is for another year. And so there's a little bit of uncertainty there, and we don't know the answer yet. But if it goes into revenue sharing, then on July 1st, you begin the process of like the revenue sharing era. Up until then, NIL is, kind of a free market. Technically, after July 1st, all deals over $600 in NIL are to be vetted by an NCAA clearinghouse. The question is whether the clearinghouse will have any teeth to enforce it. And okay, let's say somebody decides to violate that. Are they going to put them on probation? What are they going to do? That's part of the question here is what's going to happen then. For example, in the NFL, I do not believe that an owner like Clark Hunt or whatever can just give Patrick Mahomes $10 million. Right. Well, listen, we know that you can, the salary cap is what it is, but we want to sign this receiver, so we're going to take $10 million of salary off the books, and I'm just going to give you that as my own personal money, and that doesn't work. So I don't know if that's going to be the way it is in college sports or not. What I'll say is that you hear these numbers thrown around about men's basketball support. I've read those, and I respect the reporting there. I'm just saying that like when you hear things like $8 or $9 million for a men's basketball roster, that's probably revenue share after July 1st and NIL up too. But starting with the revenue share, it's very unlikely that any power football conference team program or school is going to allocate $8 or $9 million to the basketball
of the 20.5 million. Yeah, no, I don't think
or
so.
23 million or whatever. It's just not going to happen unless you don't care about football. So I guess maybe Kansas will do that, but I don't think anybody else will. So like that, but the NIL can go up till July 1st. So what you're going to see is a Wild West. You're going to see some guys making a whole bunch of money and getting like what the equivalence of a signing bonus. And so that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Sam, let's go over to spring ball here. You wrote out some questions or some things that you'll be watching for storylines in the spring. How much can we learn about the progress of Dana Holgorsen's offense with his new retooled weapons and another year of development or an offseason of development of Dylan Raiola? How much can we learn about the progress of that situation in the next couple weeks?
I think we can only learn it through sound bites and anecdotes and scuttlebutt. And to be honest with you, I don't put a ton of stock in that.
Yeah.
I think you have to. What I'll put stock in is, okay, is the offense running at a higher pace? Is it moving with a level of pace urgency that's faster than last year? That moves more quickly. I think that's something to watch. Nebraska moved at a glacial pace in its first two seasons. I think they ran 68 plays last year, and the first year it was 62. Glacial. And I just don't think that's the way that Nebraska's going to win football games. I think you got to have some urgency and some snap to you, and you got to have a little hot step there. And I think Dylan Raiola is a good quarterback for that. Like I think that's part of it too. Is he doesn't need to be slow. The one thing the advantage you've got with Dylan is his mind moves really fast. And so what do you do with a guy like that? You get him in a no-huddle tempo and you let him deal.
I think he's a rhythm guy. I think we saw that last year, when he made a play early in a game, whether it was on a run or a scramble or something like that, like he always felt more comfortable to me after that.
He did, and tempo gets you going that way. And you look at it like he's the kind of guy that can throw an infield, so to speak. And in college football now, you have more plays like that where a guy's kind of sidearm slinging or getting it out on the edge. kind of like he'd be throwing to third base, throwing an infield, so to speak. And he can do that. And so, like, I'll be really curious to see how they tweak that and whether they want to go a little quicker. They want to get the ball in athletes' hands. Because, like, part of what I'm talking about is, like, okay, you know, you're out of the shotgun, you're no huddle, but you're waiting 27 seconds to run a play.
I know, it's crazy.
And, like, you're waiting 27 seconds to run a bubble. You don't want to wait 27 seconds to run a bubble. You want to get a first down. You want to run up to the line of scrimmage. You want to get that bubble out in 15 seconds because you don't give the other team a chance to line up. You give them a chance to line up, they're going to defend that bubble better. And so I think that's the thing that I'm watching for is, like, what's the pace like and how is the pace, you know, suit Raiola. And then when you start going at a faster pace, when you start snapping your fingers a little bit, then your defense has to be ready to go out and make plays.
Yep.
Because your offense is going to go 3 and out, and your defense has got to force a 3 and out. Like, so, like, you have to think,
or get turnovers.
Get a 3 and out, right? Something's got to happen, because if you have 3 and outs in the first half and your defense doesn't get any, your defense is going to get exhausted. And so that's part of the issue that I think Nebraska's got to work through on the defensive side of the ball. Just so we're clear, that glacial pace that Nebraska ran the first 2 years of the rule era helped the defense. It helped them.
No doubt about it.
They didn't face as many plays. And so you always have to keep into context, like, you can't just look at yards per game, because yards per game can be manipulated by the offense pace. You have to look at yards per play. And when you start looking at that figure, no, Nebraska's still pretty good there, Connor. But it ain't quite the same. It's not quite the same number. It's 52nd in the country. So they were 52nd in the country in yards per play on defense. They were 18th in the country in yards per game. You see, I mean, the difference there is pretty stark. And what that tells you is the offense's pace helped the defense to not be on the field too much, because when it came to yards per play, they gave up some. And so if you're going to crank that pace up, the yards per play and the yards per game begin to sync up more. And that's when you're going to be like, oh, wait a minute, this defense is giving up 400 yards a game. What happened? Well, they turned the pace up. And so, like, you know, I've often said, well, Eric Shenander's 2021 defense is probably about as good as last year's defense at Nebraska. The difference is the pace. The pace was different. And so, like, what he had to deal with when his defense ran onto the field was a whole different kettle of fish than what Rule was doing. And it's hard for people to, like, pick that, like, what are you talking about? I'm like, yeah, you gotta look at yards per play.
Do you think
those are things that go ahead.
Do you think you crank up the tempo a little bit? Obviously, you do it in the vacuum of the offense because it makes the offense better, but with the expectation that the defense is, as a result of it, going to take a step back, and with its personnel, you know, with its personnel is losing a lot from last year, and it just won't be quite as sturdy. So you need to rely on that big play a little bit more defensively, right? It has to. The sides have to sort of marry each other. Like, do you do that with the expectation, you know, that the defense is maybe a little less sturdy this year?
Well, what's interesting is that, like, in theory, if Nebraska's offense had been better in 21 at just executing in the red zone, that they were a much better team, and B, that defense would have been, you know, was a bend don't break system, and it would have worked. So sometimes there's exceptions to that rule, but think of it like, you know, the levels. If you're a sound guy or an audio guy in your car, think about the levels that you want your audio at. And there's pluses and minuses to move in the bass and the treble, or however you want to move it, and you kind of move it around. And that's the thing that you get. You can crank that pace up, and your defense may give up 60 more yards, but you decide that the trade-off is more than worth it. And there have been teams that have done that. I mean, LSU in 2019 had the best offense I think any of us have ever seen. Their defense was pretty bad, but it didn't matter because they just outscored everybody. And so, like, there are dials that you can move up and down the list. I will say this, Connor, that in recent years, since that LSU team, it has been Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, and all the models have been kind of the same. Big plays when we can get them, but we're going to take our time and we're going to play hard-nosed defense. almost all of the teams that have been rewarded in the CFP, not quite Indiana, but a lot of the teams that are rewarded are teams that are emphasizing the defensive side of the ball and using some version of a pro style offense that utilizes the run game and utilizes it really well. And so like the current trend is that you go back 5, 7, 10 years and you get Sark at Alabama running bubble screens with Devonta Smith. You get Joe Burrow, you get Trevor Lawrence, you get a whole different thing. And so like you got to kind of decide as a coach, where's the trend moving? You got Dana Holgorsen on your staff. And if you say, Dana, I want you to run 90 plays. Well, Dana knows how to do it. And what's great is they actually have a quarterback who can pull it off.
Right.
Like Heinrich Harburg, I don't know.
No.
But like if you said, Dylan, we're going to run 90 plays today and you're going to throw the ball 51 times. What do you think? That kid would be like, all right, let's do it. Let's load up the arm and let's go. And he probably would be really good in that context. Remember that his hero is Patrick Mahomes, and Patrick Mahomes is running 85, 90 plays a game at Texas Tech. So like, you just got to figure out like what works for the QB, what works for your OC, and how do you protect your defense. And that's an area where Rule has sided with his defense for the first 2 years. And I think I don't know if it cost him games. I totally understand why he wants to do what he wants to do. But I just wonder if you crank that pace up a little bit, you get a little bit more out of your quarterback and you start scoring touchdowns. Like in the red zone, you got to find a way to balance pace and execution so that you're getting the defense off balance. Because red zone defenses are too good today to just walk up there and go, all right, we're going to run our standard play action pass. It's not 1995 anymore. You have to be really, really good in the red zone. And one of the ways that you get there is by running a no-huddle pace that keeps the defense on the field.
No doubt about it. All things we'll be looking for hints of, I suppose, over the next couple of weeks. Sam, always appreciate the time, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care.
Sam McKewon from the Omaha World Herald. Matt Rule will talk tomorrow. Football. Josh, football. Are you ready? Get ready.
Give me a little taste. Little taste.
I don't like it when you do that. Yeah, we'll get a little taste. They're practicing today. They're using one of the 15 practices on today. And according to the schedule that we got a week or so ago, I guess maybe this is one of the questions for tomorrow. Does the Husker games?
Oh yeah,
is that a practice? So I have today.
Good question.
2, 3, 4 practices this week. 5, 6, 7, 3 practices the next. 8, 9, 10, 3 practices the next. 11, 12, 2 practices the next. 13, 14, and then 15. So as they have it on the schedule, the Husker games do count, presented by FMBO. They do count as a 15th practice. But maybe there's a way around that with the amount of quote-unquote football activity or whatever it is that
really
you do.
Slow playing these dates. 2 practices a week?
Yeah.
Come on.
3 and 2 and
come on.
Stretch it out. Keep the bodies healthy. Get productive. Josh?
I guess if you don't have an O-line, there's only so much you can do.
It gives us stuff to talk about for
that's
more
true.
than an entire month.
That's true. We do need that.
So it'll be today, March 24th, through the official end is Saturday, April 26th.
I'd like Matt Rule's opinion on the death of college basketball.
I bet he's got bracket takes.
He does.
I think he's been golfing recently. He took a little spring break.
I'd say John's going because I'm a New York guy.
He went golfing, and I think he went golfing with his kid. Did some things.
How'd he hit him?
I don't know. I don't know how he played. Maybe that's a question tomorrow. He didn't post that on his Instagram stories.
First question.
Yeah.
How'd you hit him?
Yeah. Hey, coach, how'd you hit him? He's like, bad. Remember he made that, he chipped that shot for the documentary.
Oh, yeah.
And he chipped that shot on the Joel Klatt podcast, too. So maybe he's a little better than, he's good when the lights are on, at least according to him. John emails in on the Equitable Bank inbox.
Hi, John.
Connor, did you know that Joe Burrow wanted to transfer to Nebraska before he transferred to LSU?
Whoa.
Are there any stories about this?
I would like to hear more about this.
I don't know. I have no idea about Joe Burrow's wants and desires. But
could you imagine?
That's certainly interesting.
If that offense played at Nebraska, it
Certainly
would have been
interesting.
exactly the same.
We're back after this on 1620 The Zone.